Welcome to the center of the universe and the home of the 18-time Grey Cup champion Toronto Argonauts. This is the X's and Argos podcast with Ben Grant and JB.
Welcome to the X's and Argos postgame reaction podcast, brought to you by Something in the Water Brewing, as the Toronto Argonauts down the BC Lions 33-17 in Vancouver at BC Place, where everybody was worried about the Argos, given the last two, maybe even you include the third in a row out there, but they've ended the streak. Friday the 13th seemed the appropriate day to do it. And great all-around game from the Argos. Wonderful play from the offense. The defense was sound, and special teams got it done too. I'll give you the full recap and go through some of the stuff. It's just me today, JB, unable to make this post-game recap, and maybe a slightly shorter one than usual. My name is Ben Grant. I'll guide you through this. But before we get into it, I want to tell you about Something in the Water Brewing. You've got to check out Something in the Water Brewing this coming Friday, a week from today, or actually it's now Saturday, so 6 days from today. We're going to be doing something big down there pre-game. Head down to Something in the Water in Liberty Village. You can try some Longboat Pale Ale, the beer that was made for fans of the Double Blue. And there's going to be all sorts of stuff from foods to gatherings. You can come and talk to JB and I will both be there, and then make your way on down to BMO Field to see the Argos take on the Ticats in what has become a huge game in the East Division. So check out Something in the Water Brewing this coming Friday, and look for your chance to win some tickets from Something in the Water and a six-pack from Something in the Water as well. Check the X's and Argos Twitter feed for details on that. 33-17, and I don't even think it was that close. The Lions scoring a touchdown very late with Chase Bryce coming into the game. And I don't think anyone saw this level of defeat coming. I saw an Argos win. Both JB and I picked the Argos this week. We just feel the team matches up very well against the BC Lions. And I think the Lions are a really good team. Football is just sometimes like that, though. If what you do well, the other team isn't really good at defending, and that's the case with the Argos, and what they do well, you're really good at shutting down, then often you can get kind of one-sided affairs like this, even though the Lions are a good football team. And I've said it before, it sounds strange to say, but as the Argos, I would much rather play the BC Lions than I would the Calgary Stampeders or Hamilton Tiger Cats. And that doesn't sound like it makes sense on the surface, because BC is a much better team than those other two teams, but Toronto happens to match up really well. And it starts with the defensive line for the Argonauts. BC's offensive line in pass protection has their hands full with the Argos. We saw it to open the season, that 35-27 win that the Argos had. They had 6 sacks on that night. Vernon Adams Jr. was in trouble from the get-go, and he just couldn't keep on his feet. And, he did his best. He actually had a okay game numbers-wise, but never really had a chance to throw the ball downfield because he was on his back all night. And this game was similar. Toronto with 7 sacks. They also ended up with the takeaway too, but it was the defensive line that from the opening series caused problems for BC. It wasn't just sacking the quarterback. It was putting them under pressure. Nathan Rourke got the start for the BC Lions, didn't get to finish it. And in fact, Vernon Adams didn't even get to finish it too. As I said, Chase Bryce coming in the game. But let me talk about that front four from Toronto and how they made that difference. So first, let me just look up the stats here with those 7 sacks, 3 of them going to Ralph Hawley, 2 to Robbie Smith. We actually thought, Mike Hogan and I calling the game on TSN 1050 tonight, we thought it was Robbie Smith that got there 3 times, not just 3 times, but 3 times in one quarter. It looked to us like it was Smith that got there, but they only gave him 2 sacks, still an incredible third quarter. But yeah, 3 sacks from Hawley, 2 for Robbie Smith, 1 to Jake Serezna, and 1 to Parrish as well to round out that 7. But fantastic night from that front four. And it wasn't just getting to the quarterback, like I said, it was rushing them. Nathan Rourke ended up the first half 6 of 12 passing for 50%, but his timing was off because he had to release the ball too soon. There was a deep shot that he took early that he just couldn't get a hold of because he had to let go of it too early. A couple other passes that fell to the ground, the timing just wasn't there. And it was because of the Toronto's defensive line just putting on the pressure. It wasn't enough time for the quarterback to sit back there and survey the field. And when Vernon Adams came in, it was much of the same. Like Vernon Adams looked surprised by how quickly he was under pressure. The very first play, or second play he was in there, I think there was a fumbled snap, and he put the ball on the ground, was able to recover it. But after that, it was like he would take his first read and then look to see where the pressure was, and he would either turtle or look to escape and went to the ground. That third quarter was a nightmare for BC. They were outscored 10-0. I want to say Toronto they have 3 or 4 sacks in that third quarter. It was a dominant third quarter for the Argos, and especially on the defensive side of the ball. So that's where the biggest impact took place. Toronto's defensive line against BC's offensive line, but they had other positional groups really step up as well. This running back room knew coming into this week that they were going to be looked to early, because Coach Dinwiddie received a lot of criticism last week for not running the football. You remember against the Ottawa Redblacks, Kadeem Carey only had 3 carries in the first half, 5 total carries. And it's Coach Dinwiddie, I got to give him full credit for this, because he said it himself, and he's done it a couple times this year, where he said in post-game, I got away from the run. And, that's something that I had planned on using a lot tonight. And this time he did not let himself get away from the game plan. He clearly wanted to run the football, and they ran the football. It wasn't the most effective running that they've had all season, but at the end of the day, 158 yards on the ground. You can't complain about that. Kadeem Carey, 11 carries for 41 yards. Dan Adeboboye, 11 carries for 27 yards. Chad Kelly, maybe the most impressive, because his 10 carries for 56 are actually misleading, because he had a few quarterback sneaks in there too, taking that average down. On true runs, he was probably over 10 yards a carry. And then Deontay McMahon, 3 carries for 22. Cam Dukes, 2 carries for 3 yards, both on quarterback sneaks, and Janarion Grant taking a running play early on, 1 carry for 9 yards. They ran the ball. It's not so much effectively, it was just relentlessly. And the more the time of possession stacked up, the easier and easier those yards became. And that's why I was so encouraged by the fact that Coach Dinwiddie stuck with the running game in the second half. It looked like Kadeem Carey got banged up at the end of the first half. There was one play where it was in that sort of hurry up offense when they were running to try and score some points before the end of the half. Carey took himself out and was replaced by Deontay McMahon. As he was running to the sideline, he's in full running motion, but his left arm wasn't moving. He was keeping that hanging limp. And usually that's a sign of a shoulder injury. I can't really speculate, though. I didn't see even any contact that he took. I didn't see what caused that. But he was used sparingly after that, and we really didn't see him as the second half went on. It was mostly Adeboboye and McMahon being that thunder lightning combo. But for them to stick with that rushing attack in the second half without Kadeem Carey really showed that Coach Dinwiddie was determined to stick with his game plan and ride it through to the finish. And it paid off. And that's the thing, like when you were dominating time of possession the way that the Argos were in this game, you want to stick with the run game, because there is nothing harder for a defensive line in the second half when you are exhausted, getting out there and having to take on those run blocks. Because for a defensive line, when it's a passing play, you're the one on the attack. The offensive line is retreating. They're bracing for impact. You're the one initiating the contact. You're the one initiating the hits. And it's the offensive line that has to dig deep for that energy. When the offensive line is rushing the ball, they're doing the hitting. They're getting out on you. And when you're tired, it gets harder and harder to do. And by the time we got into that third quarter, the BC defensive line was already reeling. You could see them off the ball, losing the leverage battle. They were the Argos O-linemen. And remember that typically in football games, especially in the CFL, you're going to see taller offensive linemen than you see defensive linemen. But the Toronto O-line was getting underneath the pads of the BC Lions defensive line and driving them backwards. And that's where most of their effective running came, was in the second half. In the first half, it was largely Chad Kelly's running. It was a lot of handoffs to Kadeem Carey, but it wasn't necessarily him breaking through yet. But in the second half, you had a couple big runs from Dan Adeboboye, not like 20, 30-yard runs, but he was breaking through for 7, for 8, for 9. And those yards started adding up. And Chad Kelly continued to move well in the pocket. And Deontay McMahon got in there with a couple carries as well. So this was a great game plan from Coach Dinwiddie. But most of all, it's giving him credit for sticking with it, not abandoning it, especially when your star ball carrier got a little bit banged up. So yeah, that's something I want to give him credit for, because I was critical of Coach Dinwiddie when he got away from that run game. And so I want to give him full credit for sticking with it today. And you saw the effectiveness of it. Let's talk about the first half, and a little bit of a slow start from the BC Lions, Toronto was able to get into field goal range, but they were having trouble cashing in. It wasn't until their last drive of the first half that they finally got on the board with a touchdown. So first three drives end up in field goals. Toronto has a 9-0 lead, and that ended the first quarter. They were moving the ball well, but it seemed like when they got close, it just tightened up a little bit. And on that third one, where actually, no, sorry, it was the fourth drive of the game, they got all the way down to the 1 yard line. And then it was a false start penalty on Isaiah Cage that backed them up, and Coach Dinwiddie then at that point making the decision to kick the field goal. It was a tough one to blame Isaiah Cage for. They're trying to get a first down. They're trying to reset the sticks and have first and goal from the 1. He's got a hard count. There's a blitz coming from off the edge. And it did look like there was a BC player that got into the neutral zone. And so Isaiah Cage popped out of his stance, started pointing, but it wasn't the player opposite him. And I think referees are less likely to give you the benefit of the doubt when it's not your defensive end, the guy in front of you that causes you to jump out of your stance. It was a guy about 5 feet to his left. And so, yeah, they were probably in the neutral zone there, but you don't usually see that call go your way. So it ended up being another field goal for Hajrullahu, who had 6 on the day, 1 short of the team record, which he had an opportunity for at the end at the 40-yard line. I actually thought Coach Dinwiddie would send him out for that 47-yard field goal to tie the record, but it probably was the prudent move to punt the ball away, not risk a big return on a missed field goal. Probably the smart decision, but I was pulling for Lirim to get the record. But what a day from him. But the problem at the end of the first half, and this is where I thought things might potentially go sideways for the Argos, they were up. They were dominating in the first half, and yet only up 12-10 with a minute to go in that first half. The Lions finally got things going after settling for a field goal to make it. What was it, 12-3 at the point? They come down and score a touchdown, making it 12-10. And even though Toronto had the edge by 2 points, the way that they dominated play in the first half, I can tell you that would have been a very frustrated Argos locker room had that been the score at halftime. Because anytime you're dominant and yet only really have field goals to show for it, and at that point, 4 field goals, BC finally gets into the end zone with a touchdown. It would have been really tough to get the energy up again, because it would have felt like you failed. Even with that 2-point lead coming into that locker room, you're like, man, if we could only have turned one of those field goal drives into a touchdown, that was huge. And so for them to come out with that minute left, Chad Kelly running a hurry-up offense, they drive the ball down the field, and it's back-to-back plays to Mackay Polk that make it. First of all, it's a 52-yarder to Polk where he got some space and just took off. Chad Kelly bought some time. He rolled out to his left, found Polk, and he did the rest. And then a play later, again, Chad Kelly is under pressure. There are BC defensive linemen coming from all over the place. He escapes to his left, starts directing traffic, points Polk over to the corner of the end zone, and the rookie finds space. Chad Kelly zoomed it in there for the touchdown with only 6 seconds left in the half. That was a huge momentum swing, because from that point on, it was all Toronto. At that point, they had the 19-10 lead. You're feeling good about yourself going to the half. BC suddenly demoralized. They had all the momentum. It turned on its head. And so massive drive. That was, I'll get to this later when I go through play of the game and player of the game. But yeah, that was just such a turning point moment for the Toronto Argonauts. Now, let's talk about what drove Nathan Rourke from the game, because that was, I think, to me, that's a controversial decision. Maybe it doesn't look like that by BC, and I'd be interested to talk to those covering the BC Lions and looking at it from the Lions' perspective after this. But by my eyes, I did not see enough to pull Nathan Rourke from this game. I know Toronto was dominating that first half, but Rourke's stats at the end of that first half: 6 of 12, 110 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. He had the 1 carry for a 9-yard touchdown. Those are not the stats that get not just a starting quarterback pulled, one of the better quarterbacks that we've seen in the CFL in the last few years pulled, especially coming off of 2 great performances. Put this in perspective. Let's go back in time a couple weeks. Nathan Rourke playing in his birthplace, playing on Vancouver Island, Victoria, BC, they absolutely destroyed the Ottawa Red Blacks, and Rourke was on fire that game. He looked like the old Nathan Rourke. BC played probably their best game of the season. And then following that, they go into Montreal, which is one of the tougher places to play in the CFL, and they beat up on the Montreal Alouettes. They scored 37 points. And these are, I know Nathan Rourke had a couple picks. Those are not on Rourke. They were deflected balls. And we saw that with Chad Kelly last week. You know what that's like. And so coming to this game, Nathan Rourke's coming off 2 excellent starts. The BC Lions have kind of refound their mojo. And you pull him after going 6 of 12 for 110. That's not a terrible half. And I know you've got Vernon Adams Jr. sitting on the sideline there, but I have to question that decision, because not only does that maybe shake Nathan Rourke a little bit in his confidence, you now maybe have a quarterback controversy in BC. Vernon Adams came in the second half, and I don't think was better. I think, if anything, was worse, and his numbers are certainly worse. His completion percentage slightly better, but he was safe with the football except for one throw. He went deep downfield on one throw, and it got picked off. Deshaun Amos made a fantastic play, juggling interception at the Toronto 1 or 2 yard line. But yeah, Vernon Adams, 4 of 7 for 75 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception. What do you do now as the BC Lions? And Mike Hogan asked me that question at the end of our broadcast. What do you do if you're the BC Lions now? And here's where you also have to give credit to the co-defensive coordinators for the Toronto Argonauts and that Toronto Argonauts defense. It would have been really easy to see the momentum flip with a quarterback change. They spent all week preparing for Nathan Rourke, a short week getting ready for Nathan Rourke, and that's enough trouble in its own. He's one of the best quarterbacks in the CFL. And what happens after a half? They bring in the guy that was, until he went down with injury, would almost certainly have been the most outstanding player in the CFL. I don't think there's any question about that, actually. Vernon Adams Jr. playing sensational football this season, and you as a defense have not really they do prepare. You spend time talking about it. You spend time going through on film for the second and third quarterback. You do, but not nearly the amount of time you spend prepping for the starter, and in this case, Nathan Rourke, for this game. So full credit to the Argos defense. They didn't miss a beat. Vernon Adams got in there and immediately was under pressure and went down time and time again with Argos sacks. So yeah, I got to give a lot of credit to the Argos defense for, again, stepping up in a pretty tough scenario. So I'm glad this is not a problem that Toronto has to deal with. But in BC this week, that's going to be the major talking point. That's what Coach Campbell has done by making that change. What he's initiated is a quarterback controversy, and there's no escaping it. It is what the media in BC will be talking about this week. And the fact that both of them didn't play well, maybe that's better. Maybe that gives you some confidence in just going back to Nathan Rourke. Because if Vernon Adams had come out and played well, or even if he has a touchdown pass, maybe it makes that situation worse. Let's get back to the Toronto side of the football. I want to run down some of the receiver numbers, very different from last week. Obviously, about half the number of attempts, 56 passing attempts last week, only 28 this week. But Chad Kelly, really efficient with it, 18 for 28, 268 with a touchdown, no interceptions, protected the football extremely well. Maybe let me just talk about him first before I get into some of those receiver numbers. What I loved about Chad Kelly's game tonight is that he recognized that protecting the football was a major priority. They lost the turnover battle badly last week, and it was one of the elements that cost them the game. And while I don't blame Chad Kelly for a lot of those picks, he had 4, it was a difference in the game. And he clearly had been spoken to about protecting the football and the importance of that today, because he just didn't put the ball in harm's way. He was safe with the football, but not conservative. He went downfield, but when he was sure of himself, when he was sure he had an open receiver, he attacked downfield. And in the pocket, he did a very good job of protecting the ball too. He was actually under a lot of heat tonight, and the Argos O-line has been outstanding all season. I know they've given up a lot of sacks, but I think they've actually been pretty solid in pass protection for the most part. A lot of those sacks go to quarterbacks hanging onto the ball too long. Sometimes when the Argos have been behind and the Argos are in passing situation, that's where some of the sacks have come from. And tonight, he was under fire a lot. He took a ton of hits after he'd released the football, really toughed it out. But what I love to see from him is he wasn't leaving the ball hanging out there. When he was in the pocket and there were BC Lions players flying around on either side of him, he protected the football. He had two hands on it. And the few times that he rolled out, what you saw him do, and one in particular was that long play to Mackay Polk, he rolled out to his left. And what you don't always see quarterbacks do is keep track of what's happening in behind him. And that's so often where you see these sort of sack fumbles come from. He rolled out to his left and checked his blind spot. He looked back to see, is Mathieu Betts bearing down on me where I'm going to have to maybe tuck and run this or quickly get rid of it. He looked back, saw there was no pressure, and launched the deep ball. And I actually don't think that was I think that was the one that drew the pass interference penalty, or the incidental pass interference penalty, which I want to talk about a bit further in a moment. But really heads up play from Chad Kelly. And I think that was indicative of the play we saw from him this evening, just knowing that I got to protect the football. If nothing else, if I do that, we're going to win this football game. The receivers tonight. Mackay Polk was the favorite target of Chad Kelly. 8 targets, 6 catches, 116 yards, and a touchdown. And he also had that big 52-yard play.
You right
here. Here comes.
You need a break for one thing.
Here comes Hoagie.
My name's Mike. I work here. Big win against one set of Cats tonight as we do this. Next game is also against Cats of the Hamilton variety. Tickets on sale, argonauts.ca. It will be at least the second biggest crowd of the season. Hope to see you there. Argonauts.ca. We need the noise. A win next week. We don't know what's going to happen Saturday with the Ticats, but if they win on Saturday, a win against Hamilton reduces the Argos magic number of putting the Ticats out of our misery to 1 point gained or lost. So come, bring the noise. Ben's now going to talk about receivers. Thank you and good night.
This message brought to you by Mike Hogan from the TSN broadcast team. And yeah, he's right. You got to get down to BC, to BMO Field. I got BC Place on my mind. You got to get down to BMO Field for this game. Stop by something in the water first. Come on over to BMO Field for the game. It's going to be a good one. And when there's a good crowd, and as Mike said, it's shaping up to be a great one, there is no better place to watch a football game. So I hope to see you there. Right. Let's get back to receivers. Polk. This was, in a way, like, I know he had great numbers. He's had great numbers a few times, including last week. This, to me, was his breakout game because he became the guy. Like last week, it was sort of Unger or Coxie. Unger with like 13 targets, which is still absurd. Coxie with the 2 touchdowns, including that diving touchdown. This was Mackay Polk's game. And I've been telling you all season, this is what he's capable of. I was really excited when the Argos brought Mackay Polk in, and right away talked to you about the potential that I saw in him. He's a playmaker. He's a guy who suddenly finds a different gear when the ball's in the air, and it doesn't necessarily reflect in 40 times and stuff like that. He's just a football player. He goes and finds the football, has a knack for bringing it down. He can catch balls in contact, and he's great after the catch. We saw a little bit of that here tonight. And Chad Kelly realized early on this is going to be his guy. And in that big touchdown drive to end the first half, that's where he turned to, and he kept going that direction when he needed a play. So, yeah, I'll see you later. Thanks, Mike. Huge game from Mackay Polk with those 116 and that touchdown. Davaris Daniels also playing a big role. 4 catches, 71 yards, but he was a great outlet for Chad Kelly. Chad was trying to get him going this game. He maybe forced a couple balls to him. I think those 2 missed targets. One came in high, and was sort of deflected off Daniel's fingertips. One could have been a big play early on. Chad saw Davaris one-on-one down the sideline and just wanted to give him a chance. He threw the ball up high, was hit by Mathieu Betts, like right as he released the football. And so he had to change the trajectory. Normally, he's going to fire that to Daniels, but because Betts was like right in his face, if he tried to fire it, it would have been knocked down. He had to launch it sort of trebuchet style, super high over the wall. But because of that, when Daniels looked around for the football, it's not in the range that he's looking for. It's coming in from height. So he never picked it up. He was open, but the ball ended up kind of landing at his feet. That could have been a big play. But even still, Davaris ended up with 71 yards and a big 71 yards tonight. He was an important part of this Argos offense, an important part of this win too. Kadeem Carey, 2 catches, 25 yards. Demonte Coxie, a pretty quiet day. And I thought it might be a really big day for Damonte Coxie because he was going against Gary Peters. Now, I know that doesn't make sense because Gary Peters is the one of the best cover corners in the CFL. And so why would I think Damonte Coxie was going to have a big day? Is because Peters was banged up coming to this week. He had an ankle injury. I didn't know if he was going to be able to go or not. He's really dependable. He doesn't miss a lot of games. And so I guess I wasn't surprised to see him dress. But he got banged up in this one as well, looked to be walking around very gingerly on the BC sideline. And it just seemed like with him not coming in 100%, knowing how well Coxie has played this season, I really thought this might be another Damonte Coxie game. But that's the nice thing about the Argos receiving core. They've got options. It doesn't have to be Coxie every week. It doesn't have to be Davaris Daniels every week. You can see now, you can turn to Mackay Polk. And this is why, I talked to you about this like 6 weeks ago. This is why the Argos felt comfortable in releasing Rasheed Bailey. I really like Rasheed Bailey. I think he's a very good receiver. The Argos released him at a time when he was leading the team in receptions and yards. And the reason for that, the entire reason for that was Mackay Polk, because with Rasheed Bailey on the field, it meant that Mackay Polk couldn't be. And what the Argos front office saw in Mackay Polk was exactly what you got to see tonight. And really over the last few weeks, as he's come into his own here, this is a playmaking star. Mackay Polk is set up to be a star in the CFL. He's got the height. He is technically the tallest receiver. Both he and Coxie, I think, are listed at the same height. But if you go back to their official Combine Pro Day measurements, I think Polk comes in a little bit higher. So he's got that height. He's got great reach. He's got really good game speed. Not something that necessarily showed up in his 40 time. But like I said, you watch him track down a football, you're not going to find a lot of faster guys on this team. And he's a really good route runner, catches contested balls. You saw all of that here today. But that's why they felt comfortable enough to release Rasheed Bailey at that time. And it's now, I think, becoming apparent to Argos fans, even those that really question that decision and were complaining, were in my social media feed saying, what are the Argos doing? How could they release Rasheed Bailey? You're now seeing the reason for that in Mackay Polk. Continuing on down, Kevin Mittal, 2 catches, 16 yards. I'm still waiting for a big game for him, and they seem reluctant. The transition for him into the lineup for Richie Sandani has been slower than I thought it would be. Sandani himself only with 1 target, no catches on the night. Dave Ungerer with 3 targets, no catches on the night. But let's talk about Kevin Mittal for a second. So Mittal, his skill set is something unique to this Argos receiving core. They don't have another Kevin Mittal on this roster. He's got the build of a running back. He comes in weighing about 230, but he can move. He's got great acceleration. He's a great blocker, and he delivered a couple of hits on both of his receptions tonight. He leveled defensive backs. Manny Rugamba actually took the first hit from Mittal, and then I can't remember who it was that took the second one, but both times it was Mittal that was delivering the hit, not the defensive back. The defensive back was bracing for impact. And the Argos just don't have a lot of receivers in the receiving core like that. So when you look at the whole package, you've got Ungerer as the outlet. I love him at Z, the wide receiver to the field side, the dependable guy that Chad Kelly can always find in those 2nd and 10 scenarios. And maybe it's just the fact that they weren't in a lot of 2nd and 10 scenarios that they didn't go to Ungerer a lot today, but they always know they've got that. You've got Davaris Daniels, the proven playmaker, and he's transitioning a little bit into the role of possession receiver. He's now been moved from the boundary side, where you usually see a lot more footballs, to the field side. He's playing the Y spot. That's sort of the middle spot of the 3 receivers to the field side. But Chad has full confidence in Davaris Daniels in that spot. And you go back to the Hamilton game a couple of weeks ago, you saw how dependable he was for Chad Kelly when he needed a completion over the middle of the field. He turned to Davaris. You saw that again tonight. Davaris was missing last week, and it showed. And then you've got inside, if Kevin Mittal, if that's to be his position, that our receiver spot, the 3rd receiver to the inside, that's the ideal spot for him. You can use him as a blocker. You can also use some trickery. We've seen Coach Dimwitty use it as well, where you have, let's say you have Kevin Mittal to the 3rd receiver to the right. Let's say you've got Kadeem Carey in the backfield. You can motion out Kadeem Carey empty out the backfield at the last minute, bring Mittal in there and use him as a running back because he's got that running back build. He's comfortable running the football like a running back. They used him on end arounds and jet sweeps and plays like that at Laval. So he's done it before too. And I just think that's yet another weapon that Toronto has, and it's yet another different style receiver. And so when you add that to what you've got on the boundary side, the 50-50 ball winner in DeMonte Coxey down the sideline, the playmaker that you've got in Mackay Polk, who can take any pass and go the distance. He's so good on those dig routes, those post routes, we saw post corners today. We saw all sorts of routes added to his tree today. I really like what that's setting up to. Those 5 guys that all have very different skill sets. It just opens up the playbook. It gives Chad Kelly options. And so I think going forward, it's got to be Kevin Mittal that the Argos turn to in that R spot. And again, nothing against Richie Sindani. I love what he's done since coming here. He had a great season last year, was a breath of fresh air in the Argos offense, but this is going to be Kevin Mittal's position going forward. I can't wait for that full transformation, that caterpillar to butterfly. And maybe it's, it was Mackay Polk today. Maybe it's Kevin Mittal at some point over the next couple of weeks where he really surfaces and becomes that guy going forward. So a great day from the Argos receivers. They didn't blow up the way they did last week, but because it was a very different style of game. Now, I'm not 100% on the time of possession numbers. I do want to address that briefly here. The CFL website was back and forth, and the stats that I have access to, the media page, it at one point had Toronto with 41 minutes of time of possession. That's now down to 38, and that's an unusual thing. You don't usually lose minutes in time of possession. So I'm not 100% on these, but they show right now 38 minutes and 25 seconds to BC's 21 minutes and 35 seconds. That is what I was talking about off the top. That is the massive difference in this game. When you can hang on to the football for that long, it is going to be a huge difference for you in the second half. And that's where a lot of that success came from. Let me just run down a few more numbers before I give you play of the game here. So first downs, Toronto 25 to BC's 13. That's huge. Net offense, 412 yards to 222, almost a 200-yard difference, and that's what really shows up on the scoreboard. And even just like the number of plays they ran, like last week, it was all passes for the Argos. They got to dictate the pace. They still had 68 offensive plays they ran because they weren't necessarily going for those big strikes. It wasn't all passing through the air. They made use of that ground game, and that's what allowed them to churn out 68 plays to BC's 24. And then the rushing yards, this is where they killed the Lions. 165 yards rushing for Toronto to BC's 62. They kept William Stanback under wraps. He had 6 carries for 21 yards. The BC ground game wasn't a thing. Almost all of their rushing yards, their leading rusher was from Terrell, who came in for only 2 drives. And those last 2 drives that the Lions had, when they basically emptied out the cupboard, it was Chase Bryce came in to play quarterback, Terrell came in to play running back. That's where BC got almost all of their rushing yards from. So that was a massive difference for the Argos tonight. Passing yards were 268 to 217. The Argos lose the penalty battle. They had 4 penalties. BC with only 1 penalty all night, which is pretty unbelievable, but 4 is fine. I'll take that. Toronto's had a problem with penalties this season. We often see it up into that 7-8 category. 4 penalties for 38 yards. I think Coach Dinwiddie would live with that number. And maybe one of the most important stats of the night, John Haggerty with only 4 punts. As good a player as he's been on the team this season, sometimes booming them, 50, 60 yards plus, only an average of 49.5 tonight. I say only, that's still a great number, but he was only called on 4 times. But one of the times that he went out to punt, something went wrong, and I want to address that. We'll talk about sort of transition to special teams before I wrap things up here. They let up a punt block where Patrice Rene came through and cleanly blocked the punt. This is something that I know special teams coordinator Mickey Donovan is going to want to take a close look at, because there was a mental error somewhere on the field for the Argonauts. And having looked at it a couple times now, I don't know who's to blame here, because it's not like somebody missed a block, went for him and missed it. It's not like someone was trying to make a decision, which guy do I block, and they chose the wrong guy. Nobody accounted for him. They had everyone else picked up. no one even looked at Patrice Rene. And it's not like he was disguising it. It looked like everyone was coming. Everybody did, but there was a numbers problem for the Argos. Patrice Rene, no one was close to him. He came right in and was at Haggerty before Haggerty really even made contact with the football. Where I want to give Haggerty a lot of credit is recovering it. Patrice Rene knocks it down on the ground. Haggerty picked it up. And it's a good thing he did, because there were only Lions players around him. And had he not picked that up, that easily could have turned into a scoop and score. The Argos probably still hang on to win it, but it would have been a lot tighter down the stretch had he not been able to come up with that football. So that was a massive play in the game for Haggerty to recover that. But that's a problem they have to fix. They got to come back and look at that film, figure out where that went wrong. I don't know if it was something that BC schemed up, something they saw, if they overloaded it. It didn't look like anything that was obvious to me, but Mickey Donovan, I'm sure, will clean that up for next week against Hamilton. The other special teams members, how about Hajrullahu with 6 for 6 on field goals and not missing any of the point afters as well. Huge night from him. And Janarion Grant, I know he didn't get the touchdown return, but an 80-yard punt return, that was a huge part of this game. It was another one of those momentum changers in the first half, where Toronto was immediately knocking on the door, basically inside the red zone after the punt return. And it's so rare that you don't see, if Janarion Grant gets an 80-yard return, you're saying, well, how did he not make it into the end zone? But it was just beautifully played. I think it was Lee that tracked him down the whole way, played the angle perfectly. He's gone up against, they're very, in the West, they're really familiar with Janarion Grant. They know his speed, they know his deception, and Lee did a masterful job of tracking him to the sideline. There was no opportunity for Janarion Grant to cut that back inside or to turn on the Jets. There was just no out. And so he eventually chased him down and made a touchdown saving tackle. But that 80-yard punt return is what set up that score. I think that was, I've lost track of the game here, but I think it was I want to say that was the third Toronto field goal at the time to put them up 9-0. So all in all, nice special teams night, a great defensive night. You've got the pick from Deshaun Amos. You've got the pressures, relentless pressure, the 7 sacks from the Argos defense, largely from the defensive line. And then the offense doing what they needed to do, throwing it well through the air, obviously running the ball really well. Anytime you got 165 yards rushing and doing something right, a well-called game start to finish. This, I got to tell you, having been in BC place for both of those brutal losses, the 55-8 shellacking in 2019 and the 44-3 annihilation in 2022. Those flights home from Vancouver to Toronto are the longest flights in the world. And it is going to be a party back to Toronto on the team plane. And there's nothing better than when you got to go back to your plane. You got your ice strapped to your knees and your elbows and everything else. You get to just kind of relax and crash back and enjoy the long flight back, the celebrations, the music, the festivities that will continue on into the night for the Toronto Argonauts. They deserve this win, and all 3 phases contributed. The coaching staff contributed. It was exactly how you wanted it to go for the Toronto Argonauts. One last thing, just before I get to players of the game, play of the game, I just want to talk about injuries because there were some concerns. BC probably with some more serious concerns on the injury front. They had a number of guys go down, but Toronto not without the concerns. So both tackles, and I'm mostly worried about Isaiah Cage. I did see him walking around on the sideline late in the game after he'd been replaced, but he was the first of the 2 tackles to go down. He came out, and it was Ryan Hunter who bounced over to left tackle, and they put Dylan Giffen in at the left guard spot. And then very late, it looked like Dejan Allen, I couldn't tell what it was, but he had to come out of the game, and he was replaced by Landon Rice at the right tackle spot, which is, again, why you dress 7 offensive linemen. And I don't understand teams that don't dress 7 offensive linemen where you suddenly have to put a defensive lineman out here. It happens so often. So full credit to the Argos front office and coaching staff again, and they always do dress those 7 linemen. This is why. Now, fortunately for the last Toronto drive, I saw Dejan Allen come back into the game. So clearly that's not something they're overly concerned about. So going forward, I like to think that Allen's going to be good to go for the game against the Ticats, but we're going to have to watch throughout the week. is Isaiah Cage able to go at left tackle? There have been a few dicey moments with Cage throughout the season where he's gone down with injury, and he's done so well to tough it out this year. Hopefully this is something else that he's able to play through, get himself back to full health, because he's been a difference maker at a tackle. They can rely, like Cage and Allen out there together have been solid at right tackle, especially in pass protection. So that's something that if we'll have to keep an eye on it throughout the week. If going to practice, Cage isn't able to go, or even if he's limited by the time we get to midweek, we're going to have to keep an eye on that situation. So the other injury concern, Kadeem Carey, we'll keep an eye on that too. Looked like what might be a shoulder or an arm injury, something like that he suffered at the end of the first half. I think based on, again, seeing him still on the sideline in the second half and knowing what the score was by the point that he really came out of the game and was removed from the game, I like to think that was just the coaching staff saying, look, we've got a lead. We're going to be pounding the football. Let's not put our star back out there when they know we're running and we know we're running. Let's let Adeboboye and McMahon chew up these carries and see if they can get some yards as well. So that's what I'm hoping that that injury was. But those were the major concerns going through the game. And if I'm missing one, it's not coming to me right now. Again, trying to do the solo. This is where I need JB to step in and give me a few words while I collect my thoughts and get ready for the next segment. This is why the 2-man pod is obviously the way to go. Let me get to my player of the game and play of the game. So player of the game, I'm going to go defensive line. I know it was Ralph Hawley that got the 3 sacks, and I know it was Robbie Smith that got the 2. I am giving it to the guy that got 1. Jake Ceresna as my player of the game. Yes, he only had 1 sack. Yes, he only had 3 tackles. Jake Ceresna was the biggest difference maker on the Argos defense tonight. He was relentless. He was bull rushing like a man twice his size. He was in the backfield on every passing down. And he was the reason that Ralph Hawley and Robbie Smith accumulated sacks, because it was quarterbacks having to get away from him and turning into the face of Robbie Smith and Ralph Hawley all night long. And so Ceresna maybe doesn't have the numbers. If there was a sack assist category, Ceresna probably has 4 of them tonight. And you add to that the hurries and knockdowns. And of course, he did contribute with his own sack too. So for me, player of the game, it's Ceresna. You shout out the rest of the D-line. Obviously, they played really well. You shout out Deshaun Amos. I thought Royce Metier made a couple key plays in coverage tonight, too. The defense in general had a great game. But, yeah, Ceresna was the leader on this night. And for play of the game, I'm going back over to the offensive side of the ball. It was the play before the touchdown at the end of the half to Mackay Polk, because Toronto, looking to score before the end of the half, getting a touchdown there was huge. Even a field goal would have been great, but getting a touchdown was huge. And time ticking down in that first half for Mackay Polk to find a way to speed through 52 yards of ground was a huge play. Chad Kelly extending the play, finds Polk, and Polk did the rest. That, to me, was the play of the game, because it set Toronto up, at the very least, for an easy field goal. And you go from BC scoring to end the half to Toronto scoring to the end of the half, knowing Toronto's getting the ball back in the second half as well. To me, that was such a massive moment. And obviously, it was made even bigger by the fact that Polk, on the next play, caught a touchdown pass. But even if that ended up being a field goal, to score at the end of the half instead of BC scoring at the end of the half, and then knowing you're getting the ball to start the second half and being able to take that down and turn that into points too, it was that Polk catch and run for me that was the play of the game. But on this night, there were so many potential play of the games. You could have probably, I know JB would have chosen a defensive play, I'm sure. But at least I gave Ceresna the defensive player of the game for that one. So 2 more great CFL games coming up this weekend. And you've got a rooting interest, Argos fans. You're probably got to cheer for the Tiger Cats tomorrow, the Saturday game against the Red Blacks, because Toronto is trying to chase down those Red Blacks. So you got to become Tiger Cats fans for a day. And then there's still the chance. Montreal, they're in the distance, but maybe you become a Calgary Stampeders fan for the closer in this one. And next week, of course, make sure you find your way to BMO Field Friday night at BMO Field. The Ticats are in town to close out the season series with the Toronto Argonauts. For the absent JB and for Mike Hogan, who made our guest appearance in this podcast, this is Ben Grant saying so long, and may all your pre-snap reads be good ones. I'll see ya.
Go, Toronto Argos, go, go, go. Pull together, fight the foe.